Buongiorno ai qui presenti, buongiorno.
Good afternoon to the people here, actually good evening, and good evening to the people in London, and good morning to those in New York. We're here today for a presentation on and a view of the world of Moscato d'Asti, Asti Spumante, and its two styles. We have a number of producers with us tonight to describe the world of Asti and Moscato d'Asti. I'm going to start with a short presentation of the Asti designation and also some geographical notes. Obviously, we're in the area of Piemonte that stretches across the provinces of Asti, Cuneo and Alessandria. It includes 51 municipalities, in total approximately 10,000 hectares under vines. The yearly production is approximately 100 million bottles, of which approximately 55 million Asti DOCG and 45 million Moscato d'Asti DOCG. I don't think I can advance my presentation, but okay. First of all, now, the styles that I announced were created at different times. The consortium was created in 1932, but the production of Moscato as a sparkling wine existed in 1865 when Carlo Gancia came back from France, where he had gone to work in the Champagne wineries. He came back and used secondary bottle fermentation as a methodology for the local grapes, and he started his own winery in Canelli. The main grapes being Moscato. He carried out experimentations with that grape variety involving a growing number of companies, leading to the creation of a consortium in 1932, well before the designations of Moscato d'Asti and Asti Spumante were created in 1967, while the DOCG was granted in 1993. The consortium has as its mission to promote and protect the designation and take care of the certification of the product through its laboratory. As I told you, the figures of our designation are such that, and the data here date back to 2019, but the number of bottles in 2020 was higher and was set at 90 million bottles, and we predict that 2021 will end up at 100 million bottles. The markets are very different depending on the style of wine. Moscato d'Asti is primarily exported to the United States of America. 80% of the production of Moscato d'Asti is exported to America, so that is the main market, while Asti Spumante has a much more fragmented market. It is exported to Russia, Germany, Great Britain, then Italy and the United States. The styles I was describing span from sweet, with a residual sugar of approximately 100 grams per liter for the Asti Spumante sweet, while thanks to the recent changes introduced in the production rulebook, drier wines can be produced all the way to brut spumantes. Moscato d'Asti is a style that cannot be defined as sparkling because the pressure based on the rulebook cannot exceed 2.5 bars for Moscato d'Asti, while for Asti Spumante it has to be at least 3.5 bars. And so the two styles are very different and they interpret the Moscato grapes differently. Moscato is characterized by its aromatic profile. There are not many aromatic wines with sensory profiles that are so easily recognizable as is the case with Moscato. Moscato has been in the Mediterranean for millennia, but only in recent centuries has it become a wine that has gone beyond the domestic borders and become a wine that is known and appreciated the world over. Clearly, as a consortium, what we're interested in highlighting is that the production area of Asti and Moscato d'Asti is a key area where the soils, the climate and everything exalt the aromatic profile of the grapes. Moscato is produced all over the world, and the best area where it gives really its very best is the area where we grow it to make Asti and Moscato d'Asti. We have aromatic descriptors that are typical of Moscato d'Asti. They span from flowers with a bouquet of linden, elderberry, acacia flowers, orange blossom, to fruit, white and yellow peaches, nectarines, pineapples, lychees, passion fruit, that is tropical fruit, that you will certainly have a chance to detect as the tasting starts. And all of this both to the nose and to the palate. Now, if we go back to the technicalities contained in the production rulebook, the Asti Secco, which is the dry version of Asti Spumante, was added to the rulebook in 2019, and it was expanded in October 2020 with Extra Brut, Brut and Pas d'Oseille as 3 additional styles. And this because Moscato-based wines can be made in many different styles so that it can be appreciated by different palates around the world. Asti and Moscato d'Asti is known the world over, but never has there been such a diversity in styles as we can propose today. Now, the first wine is from a winery that has experimented great quality wines in their Brut style. Most of the production is still accounted for by Asti Spumante Dolce, which was the first ever Italian spumante. And thanks to the development of an engineer, Mr. Martinotti, led to the creation of a production technology that would be a lot less complex for the company, for the winery, making it possible for companies, for wineries to produce larger volumes with lower costs, which is pressurized tank fermentation. Mr. Martinotti happened to be the manager of the Experimental Viticultural Institute and School of Asti, and he experimented with the Moscato grapes, what became the Metodo Martinotti, and then became the Charmat method once it was patented. In 1865, Carlo Gancia created, therefore, the first Italian sparkling wine, and Martinotti created the first tank-fermented wine in the world. As you know, he did not patent this methodology, but a Frenchman did, Mr. Charmat, who just simply took this vinification method devised by Martinotti to the patent office. Mr. Martinotti wasn't interested in going through history in association consistent with his methodology, but actually Mr. Sharma's method is actually one that was designed and developed by Mr. Martinotti. The other style is Moscato d'Asti. Moscato d'Asti is not a sparkling wine. It has a much lower pressure than the 3.5 minimum for Asti Spumante, and it has a higher sugar content because the fermentation is interrupted much earlier than with Asti Spumante, much sooner than with Asti Spumante. So it's easy to differentiate Asti Spumante and Moscato d'Asti for consumers. The differentiation is visible from the very packaging. Asti Spumante takes a mushroom cork, while Moscato takes a straight cork. I think you all have a first glass. The winery represented today is Matteo Soria's. We have Lucia Soave online to describe the first wine that you're tasting. Lucia, are you there? Can you hear me? Yes. So good evening, everyone. I'm Lucia Soave, and I represent Azienda Agricola Matteo Soria. It's a farm. It's a family-run business, a family-run winery based in Castiglione Tinella, in one of the municipalities that are well known for the cultivation and production of Moscato d'Asti. Matteo Soria is specialized in the production of Moscato d'Asti. We bottle every week a small volume, approximately the equivalent of 15,000 bottles of Moscato d'Asti in their sweet version and as a spumante. As the general manager of the consortium mentioned, the Asti Brut style is a recent addition that was launched and released between the end of 2020 and early 2021. It was possible before then to make extra dry. Matteo was making extra dry. Now we have vineyards all in the municipality of Castiglione Tinella. Those that are devoted to the production of Asti Brut are located in the hamlet of San Martino, and they are on a brick, the brick being the hilltop in Piedmontese, and that's why you see the name brick on the label. The philosophy of our winery is summarized in 3 words: a tradition, because obviously this is a family-run business where wisdom was passed on from generation to generation. And then since Matteo became part of the company in 2006, we have increased our innovative and technological potential, especially at the winery and wine and grape processing level. And we're also very, very attentive to sustainability. We're not certified organic, but we practice sustainable agriculture, paying a lot of attention to anything that surrounds us from a human point of view as well as from an environmental point of view. Now, when it comes to our Asti, as it's been mentioned, it's a Sharma or Martinotti method wine that is tank fermented. In other terms, so as I can tell from the tours, the guided tours that I lead and the tastings I lead, this is thought of as a surprising wine because on the nose it is fully a Moscato with the typical aromas, white peaches, acacia flowers, sage, while to the palate it tastes very dry, but at the same time it is delicate, gentle and elegant, and it is well counterbalanced by the bead, by the perlage with these fine bubbles. Now, in terms of the grapes that go into it, it's 100% Moscato, and it is a variety that, because of the characteristics of the soil and the area, the terroir of Castiglione Tinella, it has a lot of acidity that perfectly outbalances the sweetness of the wine. In this version, as a Brut, you don't really detect the sweetness. It's 11 grams per liter of residual sugar, so it's definitely dry. And in terms of pairings, it's a wine that is extremely versatile. The bubbles can accompany a meal, from an aperitif all the way to a dish that is rich, but also, as I'm told from visitors from all over the world, it goes well with spicy foods and foods with a lot of spice and sweetness. And so I encourage you to try that pairing too. Okay, sure. That is a very interesting hint that you're giving us. And I would like to highlight that also in the Brut style, you find all the Moscato descriptors. So if you really appreciate this lively fruit, you can find it also in the versions where you don't have the sweetness to support the aromatic profile. Now, second wine. Enrico Gobino is online to describe it, and here we have a very nice opportunity to go back to what I had anticipated, namely that Asti is historically a wine that was first created as a metodo classico. This is a company, a winery that still continues in the wake of that tradition, and we're going to ask Enrico to tell us more about this wine. Can you hear us? I can hear you. Good morning, New York. Thank you, Giacomo, and good evening, everyone else. This is a Metodo Classico, our cuvage vintage. It is an interpretation that we wanted to revitalize. And we have rediscovered it, really, because our winery is very young, and because we didn't have too much history of our own, we had to distill some inspirations from the history of Asti Spumante. So we found a great opportunity in the possibility of making an ambitious sparkling wine. The idea is to valorize the characteristics that can ensure the consistency over time to any bubbly products. That's why we chose grapes. The grapes are from an area which is a bit of a patchwork between 250 and 400 meters above sea level. And we made this cuvée looking for a certain level of elegance and the possibility of creating a certain result by means of a cellaring, an aging on the lees that lasts between 9 and 15 months. Now we've just released the 2017 vintage and the 2014 vintage that we presented last year. Ended up at the fourth place, winning the fourth place at a competition of Moscatos, and it was the only bubbly. Now, on the nose, you get already this effervescence, and it carries some distinctive notes, as if the primary notes would leave room to more balsamic notes, and that is also something we like a lot, and we are very happy with this result. It is interesting to blind taste a metodo classico because very often we associate sweet notes to primary aroma being expressed, while here the primary aromas are living room to balsamic notes and herbaceous notes, and with an important acidity. Important because it ensures also a lot of longevity, and it makes us dream of audacious pairings other than the pairing with sweets, which comes as no surprise to us Italians. We all know. But we all know here among the producers that this wine works well with lots of different foods, not just desserts and sweets. So the alcohol and the sweetness contribute to the elegance of the sip, which is very complex and has therefore the ambition of being cellared for long, just like other aromatic grapes around the world that have these great potential for aging. Now, absolutely, a wine like this will benefit from the consumers' patience in the cellar, because if they can wait, it will retain all its fragrance and will give us an opportunity to pair it, also considering that the cellaring that will continue with the yeasts in the bottle will smooth out the edges of the sweetness. Thank you very much, Enrico. If you want to stay online, there might be questions later on to delve deeper into the subject. Wine number 3, Tosti 1820, and I'm asking Giulio Bosca to take the floor. Yes, this one is working. Good evening, I'm Giulio Bosca, and I'm the 8th generation of Tosti 1820. Tosti 1820 because this year we are turning 200 years of vintages. And so 200 vintages, and we have a long history in our area, particularly in connection with Moscato. We're here to taste our Asti Secco. Asti Secco is a product that we've always believed was interesting ever since the beginning, and it is a revisitation of the typical Moscato or Asti. In this case, we complete the fermentation, driving the sugar content to 0, and then we vinify it with very little sugar, 17 grams per liter. And we have an overpressure of 5.5 bars. In this case, we have a product that is really well suited for any pairing. Aperitifs, we don't want to mention the most famous Sharma wines that everyone is aware of, but I think it can compete very well with Prosecco in that respect. And it works well with just any pairing, any food. The beet is persistent and lingering, and that is due to the CO2 that is naturally formed through fermentation and that surfaces little by little. On the nose, you can recognize the aromatic characters of Moscato. As I said, thanks to this aromatic profile, it can truly work well with any food within a dish, and also attract people who who like sweeter wines, or in any case aromatic wines. Something that I'd like to mention is that our family and our company is closely related to our territory, and there are 500 families that sell us their grapes from over 150 hectares in the area covered by the designation and hence the consortium. And we make a blend from these grapes that is the best to us, and it can have different characteristics whether it comes from the area of Alessandria, Asti, or Cuneo. So we blend them together to bring out the very best. Now, something special is our bottle. I don't know if you've noticed. It's a bottle that has a very special shape. On the front, it's not a key, but it's a navel, because the bottle is shaped like the body of a woman. Because in history, historians tell us that the female body was what made it possible to continue our species. It is the body that contains life, the baby. Just in the same way, in the ancient civilizations would create pots in the shape of female bodies to preserve the most important, the most precious elements. And this is a representation of what's most precious to us, our wine. And so we have a bottle with a navel, which has become our hallmark, and is representative of the products of Tosti 1820. Thank you, Giulio. Something that Giulio has reminded us of is that these wines are wines that can also be enjoyed on their own, not just in pairings with food, but also as an ingredient in mixology, in cocktails. So much so that the consortium is promoting a number of initiatives to find out more about the possibilities of Asti and Moscato d'Asti in mixology. Thank you, Giulio. Now, we're moving on to wine number 4. Unfortunately, because of prior commitments, we don't have the people representing the company, but I think we can taste it on our own. The winery is Canti of the Fratelli Martini group. It's an Asti Spumante, Martinotti method, so tank fermented, and this takes us to the most classic sweet Asti Spumante, made using tank fermentation. We've tasted the Metodo Classico with Cuvage, and Enrico Gobino told us about it, and in this case we have a Martinotti, which is featured in the range of Canti wines. The descriptors are all those that we have mentioned before. It's very floral, but also there is a good fruit that is well balanced. It's not overly sweet, and also thanks to the balsamic note that is typical of Moscato, the wine is never cloying, and it calls for a second, third, and fourth sip. Okay, let's move on to wine number 5. The winery is called La Caudrina, and we have Marco Dogliotti with us. It's his family's winery, and Marco, please, can you describe the winery, its history, and the project of La Selvatica, which is the Asti Spumante you produce? Yes, my name is Marco Dogliotti, and I'm the third son of the third generation at the winery. The winery was established in the early 1940s thanks to my grandfather, whose name was Redento, who back decided to start doing making Moscato following his own personal inspiration. There were perhaps 2-3 wineries that had just converted from farms to wineries. So it was at the very beginning of this entire process. So he saw that there was a lot of interest in this wine, and so he started developing a very different wine compared to what industrial producers were making back then. What we are tasting now is our Asti Spumante. It is an Asti that was first made following the harvest of 1993. And this Asti was also the result of a cooperation with Vittorio Vallarino Gancia, a friend of my father's, and then Gancia is one of the Gancias of the famous winery. Okay. And Vittorio encouraged us to produce this wine. This is wine number 5. I'm mentioning this just so that everybody is on the same page. This is an Asti that has gone through an extensive fermentation, approximately 10-15 days. The alcohol content is 7% by volume, and the residual sugar is 110 to 115 grams per liter. It is very rich, very tasty, because we only have suris, and a suri is a plot of land that faces south, or in any case receives sunlight throughout the day. So that develops a lot of sugar. You can recognize the citrus notes, balsamic notes, especially sage. And there's a very nice balance between acidity and sweetness, and that is absolutely important when it comes to sweet wines. And that's it. I think you've you've told us a lot about your wines. Maybe a couple of words on your label, which is very nice. Well, La Selvatica is the name of the product, which means the wild lady. And it was developed in cooperation with a famous grappa maker, a grappa distiller who lived near our village, in the village of Neve, who was very well known, not so much for his grappa, but for his labels, because he would hand paint his labels. So he would draw his labels with ink. And in this case, there's this tall wild lady who would just stride from hill to hill looking for her great love. My father was a great friend of Romano Levi's, and so Romano gave him this label as a present that we then used for this Asti. It's the wild lady is like a legendary figure in the production area. Wine number 6, Martini and Rossi. Asti Spumante sweet. There should be Livio Prandi connected with us, if I'm not mistaken. The wine is being tasted in Milan and London, but probably is not available in New York. It's the other way around. It's available in New York and not in London. So my apologies to our London friends. Livio. Can you hear us, Livio? We can see you, but we cannot hear you. Livio, can you see us or hear us?
Livio, 1, 2, 3, Livio, ci senti?
Okay, good evening to you all. Good evening. Yes, tell us more about your product, your wine, Martini and Rossi. Go ahead. Again, my name is Livio Prandi. I'm master blender at Martini Rossi for spumantes. Now, coming to our Asti Spumante, our production at Martini Rossi is between 22 and 24 million bottles per year. Our passion, our goal, and my personal goal is to bring the bunch of grapes from the vine to the bottle, giving our consumers a specific sensation so that as they uncork an Asti Spumante, they can feel the same taste as if they were in a vineyard and were tasting the berries, Moscato berries. Our Asti has a 7.5% alcohol, actual alcohol, with our winery is in Santo Stefano Belbo at the heart of the Asti area, and this crushing station we produce 30 to 45% of our master for Asti. The remaining part is bought by a group that prepares the musts for us. For us, what is essential in our production is the cold chain technology. The grapes are pressed and then clarified or fined. The must is made clear, and then the temperature is driven down to less than 1 degree. And as soon as it is ready, it is moved to our main headquarters in Pessione, where it is then the process is completed. Our Asti is a Charmat, so it's a Charmat Marzinotti method, so it is tank fermented. What's special about Martini and Rossi is that in order to support the area of the Asti designation, we have a Martini Rossi Observatory to support the growers that supply their grapes to us throughout the season and the growth season, the vegetative season, in order to assist our grape suppliers in dealing with all sorts of needs that may crop up during the harvest year. In terms of treatments, they need to use with different products and just targeting their sprayings so that this is as sustainable from an environmental perspective as possible. Now, dealing with such a number of growers is not easy. It requires a lot of effort on the part of the winery that is the greatest producer of Asti Spumante, the largest. Now, you were talking about the area. The Moscato designation area is very is not very homogeneous, and depending on the area, you get totally different musts depending on the origin. And my task is to act in such a way that the final product in the bottle is always the same, uniform and constant. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, because it gives us a different perspective from the point of view of a spumante maker that produces very high volumes. The next wine is Asti Spumante Perlino DOCG Sweet. Giuseppe Bellotti is online to directly contribute to our tasting. Giuseppe, can you hear us? The microphone is off. Microphone.
Giuseppe non ci sente, ci sono dei problemi, scusate, un attimo. Eccolo.
Okay, here. Yes, Giuseppe, we can hear you now.
Oh, ecco, ti vedo anche. Vi vedo.
Va bene in italiano?
Sì, assolutamente, ci sono gli interpreti.
Okay, can I speak Italian? Yes, we have interpreters.
Sono Giuseppe.
So I am Giuseppe. I'm the export manager of Perlino. We're based in Asti.
Un'azienda che è stata fondata nel
Our winery was
1905
established in 1905 by the Perlino family. In the 1930s, they moved to the headquarters where we are now, and they were among the first members of the Consorzio Asti when it was founded. So Asti has always been an important part of the production at the Perlino winery. We produce approximately 12 million bottles of wine at this plant, and a significant proportion is accounted for by Asti. Today we're presenting our Asti Sweet, Asti Dolce, a Charmat or Martinotti method, 90 grams of residual sugar, 7% alcohol. It's a wonderful product from our wonderful terroir that goes very well with desserts, but I also love it on cheese at the end of a meal. But it lends itself to, becoming an easy beverage, an easy glass for any time of the day. We export 80% of our production. Our most important markets are more or less the same as the markets where Asti is most successful. To us, Russia is a key market. But there are approximately 40 countries that we are exporting to. But I'll leave you with this wine so that you can savor it. Thank you very much, Giuseppe. You mentioned pairings, also departing from the classic pairings that we traditionally have made with desserts, because more and more there's an opportunity to pair these products with international cuisine. So also with the other wines that are here for our tasting, we'll have an opportunity to delve deeper into this subject, trying to find also pairings that will renew the image of this wine, going back, in fact, to tradition. So stay with us, Giuseppe. We're moving on to wine number 8. The winery is Vinchio Vaglio. We have Tessa Donadio with us. And if we can hand a microphone to her, I think she will describe the wine and the company she represents. Yes, good evening, everyone. Good evening, London, and good morning, New York. Okay, it's wine number 7 if you don't have Martini and Rossi in your flight. Otherwise, it's number 8. I am the export manager of my winery, and I represent 2 small villages called Vinchio and Vaglio Serra to the south of Asti. And we are a cooperative. We were established in 1959 from 19 founding members, while today there are 192, a total of 470 hectares. We produce 70% of Barbera wines in our mix, but 5 to 6% of our total production is devoted to Moscato wines, which is very representative of Piemonte. Now, today you are tasting a wine called Valamasca. The name comes from the local dialect. The masche being in local legends the witches that would cast their spells in our areas. The Masca is also a representation of the valleys where we are located, where every now and then the fog is lingering, and that is very typical of our area. We are at elevations between 250 to 230 meters above sea level, and that is helping in the cultivation of Moscato so that a certain freshness is preserved. Our soils are mostly sandy, and there too the acidity is present. This wine is absolutely not cloying. It's very fresh, very fruity, and very typical, I would say, of this grape variety. We've made this in a very classic way so that it is representative of the area and of the varietal. So we have peaches in the aromatic profile with a citrusy finish with some floral notes such as orange blossom that are very, very enjoyable. Obviously, I have the habit of saying that Barbera is a very versatile varietal, but Moscato is as well, because it gives us an opportunity to range from an aperitif, maybe served with cheeses, blue cheeses, and something special, all the way to our desserts. I personally remember a dinner in Chongqing in China. It stood the pairing with a very spicy hot pot with lots of chili pepper in it. And the Moscato has a sweetness that sort of counterbalances this, the spice. It's a pairing that is not usual, but I recommend it. But it's very, very appropriate, because the sommeliers encourage people to associate spicy foods with sweet wines, with sugar, wines with sugar, so that it can kill some of the spiciness in them. So as Tessa suggested, this is a good recommendation. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and have a nice tasting. Thank you very much, Tessa, for the approach you took in your presentation. We're now moving on to wine number 9, Alice Bel Colle. We have Daniele Bianco with us. He's online. And Daniele will speak on behalf of the Cantina Alice Bel Colle. In this case, it's also Moscato d'Asti. Daniele. Yes, good morning, good evening. I am Daniele Bianco, and I represent the Cantina Alice Bel Colle. It's a small cooperative winery between the provinces of Asti and Alessandria, very close to where the town of Acquiterme is. Our winery was established in 1955, and from the very inception, we were designed to produce Moscato d'Asti. Out of the 350 hectares that our growers are cultivating, 200 are planted with Moscato d'Asti. For tasting tonight, we have one of the subzones of the Moscato d'Asti designation area, which is the Strevi subzone. It can be grown in the 9 municipalities surrounding the town of Acquiterme. Specifically, this Moscato d'Asti contains 40 grams per liter of 140 grams per liter of sugar, so it's very sweet, and it is effectively counterbalanced by the acidity that imparts it a freshness that encourages you to drink the next glass. The residual sugar is also ascribable to the fact that approximately 10% of our grapes are allowed to continue ripening on the vines, and that until the beginning of October. So the grapes impart this sweetness as well as a very specific aroma and flavor. Alice lies in the eastern part of the Asti designation area, and it's an area that is absolutely ideal for developing floral notes in our wines. So I think you can detect the sage, acacia blossom, elderberry flowers, which are pretty intense. And maybe you can't really detect the fruity notes because it's a floral component that prevails. It has an excellent residual sugar level, as I said, that goes very well with savory dishes, and specifically I would pair it with very tasty cheeses that can contrast the sugar effectively. This wine is part of a very small production of 6,000 bottles. Paillé is the name of a valley with an eastern exposure. It faces east, so it receives the morning sun rays that are not too strong, and therefore it does not run the risk of seeing the aromas of the Moscato grapes being burnt by the sunlight. And therefore, that's why it has so many floral notes. I was about to ask you the question, is the Paillé some sort of cru, single vineyard of your cooperative, or is it just an imaginative name? I was about to ask that question. Well, yes, indeed. It's a very small valley in our municipality, and the locals identify this as a specific place called Paillé. And historically, it's always been planted with Moscato vines. It's a relatively young wine because the first time it was produced was 2018. We tried to vinify it separately from the rest of the Moscato, and we discovered that we could come up with a product with a very distinctive, very intense floral aroma, and hence the idea of vinifying it separately. And I will admit that we are experimenting more and more at the winery so that it can become an age-worthy Moscato, not the typical Moscato that will have to be consumed before the year ends, but one that can stand a few years of aging. Thank you very much, Daniele. And goodbye, everyone. Okay, let's see if the idea of the cru of a plot of land in a vineyard is also something others do to valorize a specific characteristic of the soil, for instance, a specific aromatic profile that is typical of Moscato. I'll now leave the floor to Andrea Alpiste, wine number 10, Moscato d'Asti Vignot. Good evening, everyone. I am Andrea Alpiste of Cantina Terra Bianca, and I'm the third generation of this estate. Okay, let's start at the description of where we are. We are located among the highest, the tallest hills of the Moscato area. We're in Mango at 500 meters above sea level, and our vineyards are at elevations between 500 and 550 meters above sea level. So the wine reflects that in its freshness and minerality, also thanks to the soils where the vineyards are planted. We're talking about a single vineyard, in this case, the Vignot, with a very limey soil and rocky soil. There's a lot of limestone because our side is on the borders of the Upper Langhe, and we have a lot of limestone mixed with other rocks. Our vineyards are all tended according to sustainable agriculture rules, so we lower the use of chemicals to a minimum, and we are very attentive also to our carbon footprint, and we measure our carbon footprint all year round and throughout the production process in order to give our contribution in an attempt to preserve all the nature around us. Now, what else could I add? We're talking about a Moscato d'Asti subzone Canelli, and so it is. We have one of the three crus, Canelli, Santa Vittoria, and Strevi. The one of Canelli is the one that identifies the original birthplace of Moscato. And here is a very nice freshness and minerality, and on the palate I would define it as being very elegant and very long-lived too. It's a wine that can stand several years in the cellar, and we've kept a few bottles to just uncork them after a few years, and it's a wine that still has a lot to say. It's still very enjoyable, although it has 10 years under its belt. Now, the idea of aging Moscato d'Asti is relatively recent, and it will have to be developed going forward based on the participation of wineries that think of setting aside a few bottles every year to fully understand how old a Moscato can be tasted and still be enjoyable. We need to still understand the potential of a wine which traditionally is drunk when young, but with time and aging can develop a lot of interesting features because it has potentially an aging potential. We're now going to connect with Roberto Bava or Giorgio Bava. I don't know who of the family will speak. Okay, it's Roberto. Roberto, again, we met you a few moments ago. This is wine number 11. The wine is called Basso Tuba, which means tuba, the musical instrument. Roberto, tell us more about your winery and your wine. Well, we are a company, a young company of 100, that is 110 vintages old, and we're celebrating this year. So we have developed a lot of experience with Moscato. We started producing Moscato in the 1950s. The Basso Tuba was created in 1982 when people were rethinking of Moscato. It's not just that was no longer just the light wine, a bit fizzy, that you could drink like that. So to give it more importance, we bottled it in a Bordeaux bottle to make it not just a fizzy wine, but a wine that could be comparable to a Sauterne. I'm sorry to say these things here, but that was the idea. We wanted to demonstrate that this was a wine with a typicity of its own. You were speaking about its longevity, and actually it has an aging potential. We don't want to really age Moscatos because we like the fragrance. If you stick your nose in a glass of Basso Tuba, you will find mangoes, lychees, and floral sensations and descriptors that we've brought up already. Now, this 2020, for some reason, is all centered around mango. Now, if it is, however, stored in your cellar and it has the right level of acidity and sugar, it can stand the test of time, and it will round up, will become more refined, it will become rounder. Wines are not aged for the sake of aging, but to improve them. So I will accept the challenge to do some test agings to see what we can do with it. And then this new attitude also applies to our approach. I mean, in terms of pairings, Moscato is not only a wine for desserts. We are adopting a sensory approach that is ready and open to test new combinations. For instance, we like to propose it on blue cheeses. We have a few blues here, but the blue from Bourg-en-Bresse is a wonderful match for it. And also, there are different juices that can be made. For instance, you can make even sorbets with it because it's a fluid that contains 120 to 130 grams per liter of residual sugar. And so Basso Tuba has a 4.5% alcohol, so it is easy to freeze. And the sorbets are just excellent. I know I'm saying something really not just out of the box, but really unexpected. But it's just delicious that way. So we needed to open our mind to these new possibilities. I'm in London and I'm here for a red wine tasting, but after COVID, we should stay open to every possibility. So these Moscatos that we've tasted today, in their spumante version as well as the classic version, are very interesting. We need to rediscover this wine. We needed to produce better. And even the consortium that has preserved the rules is now ready to open to new possibilities, new generations of producers as well as of consumers. It's not enough to be sweet and to bear the name of Moscato, to be a Moscato d'Asti DOCG that is fully guaranteed as to its quality. So I would like to thank you for highlighting that Asti and Moscato d'Asti are wines that are consumed by millions of wine lovers, but that really are the very best version of Moscato because of the terroir, of the tradition, and of our rulebook. We will celebrate at the end, but we need now to move on to wine number 12. Online is Giorgio Forno of Tenuta il Falchetto. No, it's not Giorgio, it's Margherita, his daughter. Sorry, I had the wrong notes. Sorry, Margherita, no problem. I'm very happy to see you here. Would you like to introduce the company and speak about your wine? Good evening, everyone. I am Margherita Forno of Tenuta Falchetto, and I'm here to represent the fourth generation of the family. We are a family-run business. The first documents concerning our family date back to the 19th century. We were growers in the area of Santo Stefano Belbo. And in 1940, my great-grandfather started to bottle Moscato. And so we identify this year as the year when the winery was started. So we've made Moscato for over 80 years, and even today it's our flagship wine. The wine that we're known for the world over. And with Moscato, alongside Moscato, we also produce Barbera d'Asti. And we have vineyards in the Langhe to make Moscato, and then in the area of Monferrato where we grow Barbera. We have approximately 18 hectares of Moscato d'Asti in the municipalities of Santo Stefano Belbo, Calosso d'Asti and Castiglione Tinella. The soils here are absolutely ideal for planting these vines. They're sandy and white-colored, which means they're rich in lime, which is essential for the acidity of the wine. We have southeast and southwest exposures and a few south exposures, which are excellent to obtain a full ripening of Moscato grapes. And we are taking care of aromatic maturity in particular because it's very important, because Moscato is an aromatic varietal. And we needed to have a good amount of sugars in the berries as well as acidity, imparting freshness to the final wine. As far as our Moscato is concerned, we're going to present Moscato Tenuta del Fante 2020. It is a blend of two of our vineyards, one in Santo Stefano Belbo and one in Calosso d'Asti, which is the largest plot, and hence the name of Tenuta del Fante, because that vineyard has always been called that way by the locals. And so we decided to keep the name for the wine. The fermentation takes place at approximately 18 to 19 degrees C. And since it is a product that only has a 5.5% alcohol, it will last 5 to 7 days. And after that, from the end of the fermentation to the time of bottling, the wine is kept at a temperature below 0 degrees, -1, -2 C. When it comes to the tasting notes, now we certainly have the most important descriptors of Moscato. We have fruit like peaches, lemons, and citrus fruit in general, and then some tropical fruits such as mangoes, pineapples, and also a few notes of sage. Very importantly, it has a nice acidity and minerality to impart freshness and make the wines easy to drink. As it's been said by others before me, lately Moscato was found out to be a wine that can wait for a few years before being drunk, and I can confirm that it was a very nice surprise, a very nice discovery for me too. So we do have a product that is no longer so rich in CO2 as it is when it is young, but in terms of aromas, it enshrines a lot of complexity, a very nice body, and I like to pair these wines to both desserts, and I prefer cookies, especially maize meal biscuits, cornmeal biscuits, but also cured meats, foie gras, bread, butter, and anchovies, cheeses, anything that will contrast the sweetness and acidity. The acidity of Moscato, the CO2, is sort of cleansing the mouth throughout the meal. Now, a couple of words about the winery. We too try to cultivate sustainably. From the 2021 harvest, we have an SQNB certification, that is the integrated sustainability and quality system, which is a further guarantee for our consumers and for ourselves, because we work in the vineyards, so it's also in our own interest to preserve our own health, so that we don't use chemicals, and that it's important that we try to be respectful of our environment. Yes, indeed, what you said is touching upon all the sensitive topics, all the hot topics in the Moscato world, the aging potential, the freshness of the product. If you stay with us, maybe we will have the opportunity to answer questions that our guests will ask. You mentioned Mango. Mango is a fruit, but also the name of a village. It's pretty curious to have the name of a subzone, a subzone that is named after a fruit. Actually, it's not the fruit, but the village. Okay. In the rule book, we have Canelli, Strevi, and Santa Vittoria d'Alba. Canelli from 2022 will become a DOCG in its own right. So in the area of Canelli, the producers will make a decision on whether to make their Moscato d'Asti without any indication or label it as a Canelli DOCG. This is important for the producers who want to play up the role of the place of origin of Moscato d'Asti, which is Canelli, which has always played a key role in the Moscato d'Asti area. Now, from subzone to subzone, we're moving to Strevi with Andrea Costa of the Marenco Winery. Thank you, Giacomo. Good evening, Milano. Good evening, London. Good morning, New York. This is the last glass in the flight. So it's we are number 13, like the iPhone, so the most recent launch, the most recent release. Now, we are a winery that started its activity with a Moscato Strevi. We are a winery plus estate, so everything we produce comes from the grapes that we grow in our estate and that we cultivate. This is very important because just like with every great wine, and perhaps it's even more true for Moscato, everything you do comes from the premium quality of your grapes because you can't do what you do with reds or Metodo Classico or other wines. So you cannot fine it. So the grapes account for 99% of the final result. We're based in Strevi, and I agree with you, Giacomo. Moscato needs to be valorized. Moscato d'Asti specifically needs to be valorized because of these specificities that each terroir can express. Strevi is one of the southernmost municipalities in the designation area. We've already tasted a Strevi before. Because we're close to the southern border with Liguria, we have a high sugar content. We're close to the Apennine range, and we're 30 kilometers in straight line from the Mediterranean. And so these mountains are a natural air conditioning system that provides what it takes to develop the terpenes, the compounds that are so flavorful in Moscato. Then our soils are made of marl with a lot of limestone, which is also very important. So after the initial sweetness that you get on the palate, you get a lot of freshness because of that, and that calls for a second glass. The wine in the glass is called the Scrapona. It was first made in 1974. It's a very cool vineyard, so you should come and see it. It's very steep and really beautiful. It's always given us something more than the rest. There is a very specific set of aromatics with tropical notes, and it's very lush on the palate. It's lush, it's fat, but it's not fattening. It imparts body and structure to this Moscato wine, which makes it wonderful in gastronomic pairings. I agree on the exotic pairings. When I used to travel before the pandemic, I saw all sorts of pairings around the world, but I would like to remind everybody that the best possible combination is with panettone, the Italian Christmas cake. So don't forget to taste a very nice Moscato with it. So I suggest that you buy an artisan panettone and pair it with an artisan Moscato d'Asti. Yes, it was very appropriate. The final course of a meal is a dessert, and it's good to pair it with a sweet wine and not with a dry wine, which will kill the sweetness of a typical cake like panettone, which people in New York or London can appreciate. Thank you very much for what you've added to the discussion. Marco, would you like to say something? Yes, now, very quickly. In my opinion, I mean, you can look for every possible pairing, but in my opinion, it's also excellent on its own. Especially when, you want to relax on a hot day or a hot evening. A glass of Moscato mid-morning or mid-afternoon without anything to serve it with. It's something that is very refreshing. Instead of the fanciful drinks. It's something that is thought-free. You just pour it in the glass and you don't even have to think of it. Okay, that's the end of our flight. I don't know if there are any questions or curiosities. I see a hand raised. I don't know if it's London or New York, but someone is probably asking for the floor. Do we have any questions? Anyway, there's something that we didn't point out, and that is that the area of production of Asti and Moscato d'Asti are covered by the UNESCO World Heritage brand. They are UNESCO branded because human action has transformed the landscape and making it beautiful, not just in the interest of postcards, but because that is fully part of the lives and sociability of the people at the local level. So the UNESCO listing is not because of the landscape, but because of the action of humans specifically. Humans who have created this landscape, shaped it, and made it this a welcoming place, a beautiful place that is fully part of the Italian wine tradition. I don't think we have received the questions. Sorry, I'm not sure. Okay, there's someone here who would like to ask a question. Wait for the microphone, please. Here's one.
Buonasera a tutti. Volevo fare una domanda.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I would like to ask a question about Moscato d'Asti. Moscato d'Asti as a cultural legacy for Italy and then North America, where exports are made in very large volumes. Is it because in North America it is not consumed according to the same culture, principles, canons that we apply in Europe and in Italy? Can you say something about this cultural phenomenon? I mean, the difference in how we taste Moscato and what we see in it. Andrea, would you like to say something? Now, for sure, consumption of Moscato d'Asti in North America is not limited to a list of pairings. They have a very broad range of possible pairings, and they consider Moscato d'Asti as a wine for an entire meal. It's not just associated with specific pairings, and it's drunk on its own, as Marco said very appropriately, and also in pairing with many dishes. And because the U.S. and North American cuisine is sweeter, their barbecue sauce covering the ribs, the pork ribs, go well with the idea of sweeter dishes, and therefore that goes well with Moscato. Andrea, what do you think? Well, with our Moscato d'Asti, and more or less all that we've tasted today, the use they make is pretty similar to what we see in Italy. However, there's an entire part of the market that I don't get to see because it's more associated with mass distribution that is in line with what Giacomo is saying, and lots of people drink it on its own. Now, far from meals, not in meal times, they would drink it as if it were a beer. And I was told that many people consider it an affordable champagne. A champagne with a quality level that is comparable but more approachable. And when I say approachable, it's not just a matter of money, well, that too, possibly, but also from the perspective of their palate, what they like, what they appreciate. I mean, okay, champagne is also a status symbol, but maybe not everyone likes it, while Moscato is appreciated by lots of people as a drink on its own, not at meal times. Thank you very much for your question. That is very, very current. I'm told there are no other questions. I'd like to thank the people attending this event, especially those who traveled through the rain to be here in Milan, as well as those who were in London and New York. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Bravo Giacomo, grazie mille.
Aspetto nuovo, saremo Asti Spumante, Moscato d'Asti sono sparkling wine ufficiali dell'Inter.
Oh yes, this is brand new. Moscato d'Asti and Asti Spumante will be the official sparkling wines of Nitto ATP finals in Turin. So we'll have a visibility also during sports events. Thank you.